Good morning, and welcome to panel number 8, Health, AI, Tech, Investing in a Future. I'd like to start by thanking the organizers for the opportunity for the panel to talk with you today. And I also wanted to make sure we thank Peter Lee, who we just saw in the video, Corporate Vice President of Research and Incubations at Microsoft. So my name is Evan Fasher. I'm at the University of Pittsburgh, and I'm the Vice Chancellor for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. In this role, I oversee most of the university's commercialization efforts, be they with faculty, staff, students, or regional small businesses. Across all of these initiatives, Pitt is involved annually with helping to create nearly 70 new companies per year, from high-tech to small-stage Main Street businesses. And over the past 10 years alone, Pitt has spun out over 150 high-tech focused companies based on innovations created inside of our laboratories and classrooms. So we do have a sense of the importance of investment capital in helping to grow the future of the economy. So I'm going to serve as the moderator for this session, knowing full well that the two items directly after this panel are, one, the governor from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and lunch. So we're going to do our best to make sure that everything runs smoothly and on time. I think what you'll see is that what this panel does, it brings together leading investors and innovators to help discuss where capital is flowing into the AI sector, both on the health side and on the tech side as well. This group that you'll get to know a little bit more is going to explore the opportunities and challenges of investing in a future where technology is at the heart of improving the world, and also provide insights into recent trends, disruptive technologies, and things that are shaping valuations behind the wave of innovation in AI. As we all know, investment capital is absolutely critical to fueling the growth of any early stage economy. It provides the necessary funding for startups to develop, to conduct their market validation work, to scale their operations during the most high-risk part of their phases of development. Without this capital, many promising ideas that will fail to advance due to insufficient operational expenses and early development costs. This investment ultimately acts as a leading catalyst that drives an ecosystem's maturity and its ability to compete globally. So for this session, we have a handful of questions that we're going to pose to our experienced panelists to help you understand a current snapshot of where things are. We're going to organically let the discussion happen without any preordained list of a specific person answering a specific question, with the hopes that we can tease out a collection of interesting tidbits for you. We're also not going to go through the list of introducing everybody. You see their names up there. When they answer their first question, they'll go ahead and give you a couple seconds about their background. Again, we're trying to conserve as much time as we can so you get as much information as we can provide you with. So what we're going to start out with is our very first question, which is, where do you see the greatest opportunities for investment in health AI or tech AI over the next 5 or 10 years, and why?
So I'm Kevin Laws. I was COO, then CEO of AngelList for over 10 years. AngelList is a platform that helps early stage investors set up and bring more capital through more investment that flows through them into tech startups at the seed stage. And so over half of all seed stage tech investments in the US received money through the AngelList platform last year. That gives me an interesting perspective on this, in the sense that I can't tell you what will be interesting in 5 years from now or 10 years from now, but I can tell you where the money is going now. So I looked up before I came here what's happening in health tech. So today, the investment in health tech over last year, it's up about 20% in 2025 over 2024. About 2/3 of all new investing is going into AI-related stuff. That turns out to be about the same number in health tech. What is more interesting to me is where that money is going in health tech. Today, the AI is having the biggest impact and getting the most traction in the areas that aren't as regulated. So most of the money today is going into, call it clinical workflow, or the pre-trial R&D stage. And where it's going is to companies that either have current tools that help with that, so the software companies, or companies that have proprietary data that is used by those tools to help with the R&D or help with the clinical workflow. So that's kind of a summary of what's happening in the AI market in 2025.
I would just add, my name is Jeff Martin from Stalwart Ventures. I was an Apple executive for many years and have started 5 companies now in the venture capital space. The area that we're interested in from a seed investment perspective is AI data sets. We're not as interested in the LLMs because they're so frothy and expensive, and that exceeds kind of our pay grade in terms of the venture size that we can invest in. But data sets such as protein mapping of the human body for drug discovery are of tremendous interest to us. There hasn't been a chat GPT moment in biology yet because there isn't the data sets. So if we can get funding for companies like Proteus where they're mapping the proteins of the human body and proteomics becomes the focus, then we can offer that up for pharmaceutical companies to do drug discovery, bring drugs to market faster and cheaper. So our focus in AI is on the data sets. We believe that's where the real opportunity is, and from an investment perspective, that's where the greatest returns are.
Thank you very much. I'm Michael Wolf. Just to give a little bit of my background, former U.S. Navy, although it feels like a lifetime ago now. Spent about 22 years in government, 15 with the Navy. I'm a physician by training and spent a number of years on the faculty of Mayo Clinic. And then most recently spent 2 years in Saudi Arabia heading operations globally for the Evolution Foundation. And many of you had opportunity to hear from my former CEO yesterday who gave one of the keynotes. I think I like all of these answers. And I would also kind of add to it that I think some of that investment depends on where you sit, whether you're on the venture space or on the institutional space. And I see huge opportunity, certainly around data, but the data architecture, and that was covered a little bit in the video before we started. It's an area that we spent a lot of time thinking about at Evolution, thinking about, how do we take this to the next level from an institutional level to understand just the insight that it could bring and the opportunity for innovation.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Hudson. And just to underline a couple of the points already made, as you're thinking about, by way of analogy, as you're thinking about the data, everybody here is probably a user of an LLM of some flavor. And when people were originally setting out to develop large language models, they could start with a great big database that was already made for them. There's a database called Common Crawl, and it's the scraped contents of 9 billion web pages. And it was sitting there and it was ready to go. And if you had an idea as to how to build a really interesting model, like OpenAI or the Google team that built the Transformers, you could start with that, and all you had to have was the algorithm, the approach, the idea, and then the resources to go and train the model. And that has led to incredible development within that space. And now as we take that excitement to the life sciences, to health tech, what people haven't yet realized is that we're going to run into a data wall. There is no scraped content of the internet. There's no analog of that, no equivalent of that with which to start. Indeed, the internet hasn't even been built, right? Those 9 billion web pages aren't out there to just go and scrape and organize and clean. And so, one, you have to generate those data, and two, you have to think about, what does that architecture look like? And in order to generate those data, that's a question of both fundamental underlying technologies, right? How do we extract that information? But also, how do we organize it? And that's where you get to kind of a combination, I think, of interesting kind of venture scale businesses, private businesses like a SpaceX to the NASA, for example, private businesses that say, hey, I see an opportunity here and I'm really going to exploit it. But also collaboration with institutions like Pitt, or UPMC, where they have a lot of information already generated that you just need to unlock. But then you need to grapple with this architecture question. And so it's a really interesting intersection now where you're going to need, unlike in any other area, you're going to need multiple people at the table in order to figure out how to actually, generate, clean, organize, produce that which will be necessary to produce that chat GPT moment.
Hi, I'm Brian Selesky, CEO at Stack, and been in the self-driving robotics business for a long time. Not healthcare, so maybe I could broaden the conversation a little bit. Someone on the previous panel was talking about how there's this chat GPT moment and sort of fell out of the sky in 2022, and now what do we do with it? You know, I've been seeing for the last 20-some years machine learning and models sort of develop, and I can tell you it didn't just fall out of the sky. In fact, in Carnegie Mellon, if you look back, I think it's 20 plus years now, there was a program called No Hands Across America where they drove a car across the United States with a neural net. That was a very, very simple neural net compared to what you see today. But what was interesting was we kind of said, hey, this worked remarkably well, but to scale this up, it's computationally infeasible. And it sort of went on the shelf. And we would try every now and then, every couple of years, maybe we should try to figure out how to scale this. And really what happened is it's a confluence of so many things. Huge amounts of data being generated all across the world. The ability to aggregate and consume and process that data. GPUs came on the scene, which is like the biggest accidental invention ever in many ways, which then allowed us to now take these nets and build what are called deep nets to actually do more and more sophisticated things. And now if I look 25 years later from when I started doing self-driving cars, I say, wow, the way we would approach it even just a few years ago is just fundamentally completely different because of the confluence and intersection of all those things I just mentioned. So what I would say is it's an evolution, not a revolution still. I think everyone feels like they're falling behind because it changes so fast, and that's really not the case. And there's a couple of things that remain constant through all of this, which is garbage in, garbage out. And I have learned that and have stayed by that through my whole career in doing advanced automation and robotics. Garbage in, garbage out. If we put bad data into these models, it will learn wrong things, and then putting the safeguards and the things at the tail end become even harder. And so I think what my colleagues are saying here about data being so important, I think that is a very important takeaway. And the companies that are going to win, and to get to how the capital is flowing, capital will flow to not just great founders, great ideas, great business models. They're going to flow to people that know how to partner, know how to pull together the cleanest data sets possible, and where they know how to actually deliver a true return on investment. I think the days of just AI-ification of any given business model are somewhat over. It's going to be targeted towards folks that know how to sort of pull these things together into a winning model.
If I could add to that, something we were talking about in the green room a little bit is my view, as you mentioned that you don't come from a healthcare background, that it's something we really need to do more of in healthcare and particularly health tech. I like to say that we're special, but we're not that special. And there's a lot that we can learn and draw from other industries and verticals and how data has been approached in the past, some of the architectures that are being used, and pull that talent into the way that we're looking at these sorts of problems.
I want to build on a theme that Brian mentioned related to scaling. When you look at each of your industries or each of your areas, what do you see as the biggest challenges to scaling AI innovations? Everything from funding models to regulatory hurdles. How can companies, how can investors deal with the scaling challenge?
I'll start again, because this is what we focus on most of the time, is especially that how to make it as easy as possible to convert from an idea or something that has been done in a lab to that seed investment, how to make more of those things happen. And there are two things that I would focus on. One is this, I'll call it trust, and it's interesting because it's everybody focuses on, okay, what regulatory hurdles are there to financing flowing? A lot of that was solved about 10 years ago with the Jobs Act, of making it easier to be able to access, talk about what you're doing, raise money, et cetera. But what people didn't realize is, even at AngelList, we didn't just move that online and suddenly you see something and click a button like eBay and say, yeah, I'm investing in that. It's the trust networks that it enabled, and it's a lot about connecting the people who are doing the interesting work to the people who have the funding. And that's where the angel investors come in, or people who are running around and finding the companies and being able to connect them to those networks. And say, great, let me bring you inside, introduce you to some people. I know you, they know me, let's connect that and make a financing happen. And it has always amazed me that post the Jobs Act that there wasn't a larger explosion of that, because most of that happened in the traditional hubs as opposed to spreading elsewhere. The second, which I'll mention, and there's been a lot of progress on this, is, in particular in health tech, has been the licensing, especially the technology licensing from universities. So I looked up before the panel, both Carnegie Mellon and Pitt have standard licensing agreements, which is huge. But you are both in the minority of universities. They still don't have that. And I can tell you from all the data we have, you will do better having more startups, because you don't know which ones are going to succeed, rather than trying to figure out the custom licensing for each one and figure out which one's going to work, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the other one that I'd like to see a lot more of, is standardized licensing agreements that can make those things flow as friction-free and as fast as possible to commercialization.
I bet you have some thoughts on this point as well. So my name is Meredith Meyer-Grelly. I lead the entrepreneurship ecosystem at Carnegie Mellon. And this is an area that we've been diving deeply into over the past 2 years. We've done some deep studies on this, and you're right, we do have a fairly frictionless, we'd like to think, tech transfer process. However, when we established it almost 15 years ago, it was really leading edge, and now we're looking at it again and looking to make it even more founder-friendly and more aggressive in that way. Because I think you're right, just growing the denominator is a big piece of this equation, and making it as frictionless as possible is a piece of that. It's also about evolving the culture at our universities. It can be a comfortable life to live as a faculty member, like your mom, like me. It can be a tougher leap to make the jump to entrepreneurship. So making it as frictionless as possible for our researchers is a piece of the puzzle too, I think.
I also think it's a very international phenomenon right now. I think that we tend to focus AI conversations around American-centric investments, but if you look at the genomic mapping of the UAE with the Emirati population, that's the largest database that exists of genomic mapping. And to see genomic mapping, with AI move into protein mapping, again, I think will be a natural evolution of data sets. I also think that there's more AI policy in Africa than there is in North America. Many countries like Rwanda and other countries have established AI guidelines for their startup culture. Carnegie Mellon actually has a campus in Rwanda, and we're seeing that necessity is the mother of invention, and that with healthcare, I think we're going to see a lot more solutions in AI coming from Africa and the Middle East than we've seen with other categories of technology.
To add an orthogonal dimension, I think as you're looking within life sciences, you're looking within health tech generally, we also need to see, in order to build the foundation for greater scale, we need to pull our focus into earlier stages. I mean both earlier stages in development and earlier stages in the etiology of disease. Right now in the U.S., we focus a lot on the end, the end of life, right? The end of a very acute diseases, acute care, and we really need to focus on what does that etiology look like, what does aging look like, what does longevity look like, what does a natural health span look like, how do things grow and change and develop. That isn't where money flows today, but that is ultimately the only way that you can scale this market, is to really focus on, is to grow it and focus on what does that whole lifespan look like. And from a development perspective, we also need to look earlier. We need to look at the infrastructure, right? One of the things, if you look at for example, like the space economy, the aerospace economy, one of the things that you notice is as you build that basic infrastructure, and this happened with the web and telecom, as you build the basic infrastructure, you lower the barrier to entry for new companies to develop, right? You have an incredibly bright student who says, I don't have any capital, but I want to demonstrate a proof of concept, and they can do that when that infrastructure exists. But within AI and AI-enabled life sciences, that infrastructure today doesn't exist. So we need to look earlier in the developmental cycle of a company and build out that infrastructure such that a kid with a really great idea can, with very little capital, demonstrate a proof of concept. And then we need to look earlier within the etiology of disease and say, okay, we need to expand that which we are thinking about with health tech from a very acute condition that we treat at its end stages or the end of life to things that we think about throughout, your entire lifespan.
This raises a really interesting topic to me of that capital allocation and the question of, and this is an unanswered question as yet, is what is the capacity of a developing market to absorb capital? And what percentage of that needs to be put into underlying infrastructure versus to the actual technologies? I think that it's an area that is ripe for development. I hope some of our economists pick it up. I know that there are a number of people thinking about this. But as we think about developing, either certain verticals that we need or certain geographies, I think this is going to become even more important. So I hope that people continue to pick this up. And I think your thinking is right on par.
So talking about that in a little bit more detail, when we think about regions like Pittsburgh and other regions that aren't necessarily on the coast, we talk about place-based ecosystems and how do they develop. So for a region like Pittsburgh or others like ours, what is the best way for them to connect with the global capital markets and partnerships to accelerate innovation and ensure that they have broad impact? So when we think about this concept of regions that are continually saying that they don't have risk capital, do you have thoughts on how do you change that, or how do you at least move things in the right direction?
I want to jump on this one. We've been left an opportunity, right? All you need to do is find an area where somebody else hasn't noticed something. You don't make money by investing in something that everybody else already agrees is right? You make money by being unusual and right. You have to be non-normative and right. And there is, within the health tech space, there are incredible opportunities that both coasts have overlooked, right? On the West Coast, that the technology industry has overlooked. On the East Coast, that the life sciences industry, traditional life sciences industry has overlooked. And those are incredible opportunities where if you go and you start to build out that infrastructure, all of a sudden people come to you, right? No matter whom you're talking about. And Jeff and Kevin can elaborate here. People go to where the opportunities are. And if you say, hey, I have built this infrastructure, I have built this ecosystem, I have that information that you need to develop, to train your models or to develop your approaches, people will come to you, and all you have to do is have the confidence and the conviction to go and hop on top of that. Within the life sciences space, right, there's a lot, again, that you can do de novo, but there's also a lot, because it is a regulated industry, as some have mentioned, right? You also need the heft sometimes of an institution, right? So if you are a Carnegie Mellon, if you are a Pitt, you have the opportunity to say, you know what, I'm going to put my weight behind this, and I'm going to get that early momentum, get that flywheel moving, and then you become very difficult to catch. So all you need to do is be first.
Yeah, I want to jump on Lizzie's bandwagon here. I think I would say the script has not been written. I think McKinsey laid out that the average Fortune 500 company can expect to have a lifespan on that list for 18 years now. Historically, a Fortune 500 company would expect to be on that list for a human lifespan. The speed of innovation is hastening so quickly. We are building the future economy today with the companies we build today. That means Pittsburgh has this unique moment in time, this unique opportunity to blend our world-leading research in AI, robotics, or physical AI, and healthcare. And I think, on one of the earlier panels, someone mentioned a bridge, which of course we're so proud of, a bridge at Carnegie Mellon. But you think about this flywheel that Lizzie said, this is a perfect example of a flywheel, because that came out of speech recognition research from Michael Finca, who founded M-Modal. And then the founder of A Bridge was an early researcher at M-Modal and was motivated to beat M-Modal, essentially, and build next generation. So we have the opportunity to build this flywheel right now. I think we as a region, and now this is a call to action. We as a region have to decide, is this our galvanizing vision for the region. Do we want to be the region in the country that builds the future economy? And if we do, that has to be our single-minded goal and our single-minded message when we go out into the world, no matter what leader from our region goes out into the world, and no matter what we are investing in here in Pittsburgh, that has to be the guiding light. And if we can't get behind that, it's never going to happen.
Wow. Good call to action. Got applause. So I wanted to follow on what both of you were saying, because there are two things. One of the things you said with your last answer, which is absolutely true, is one of the things that's happening in software that is spreading things more internationally, as you were saying, is AI causes for certain things, not everything, but another order of magnitude drop in the cost it takes to get to actual demonstratable traction. Like, I have this thing that works, and here it is, and one company's using it, and it's just me and a bunch of AIs. And that, like I say, it can't happen everywhere, but it's happening a lot more often. And that does open it up. It's very interesting. And then the second piece you need, to your point, is the connectors. Like, who is going to then say, great, this thing is really exciting, you need to talk to that person. And like, if with those two things, that could become a reality. I see no reason that Pittsburgh wouldn't continue moving in this direction.
I think I like the call to action. I think a similar call to action could exist in many other places as well. And that's, I've had some opportunity recently to consult to some other parts of the country. And that's been one of my questions. What is the community asking for? What does the community need? What are the leaders in that area asking for? Whether it's the governor or others within that structure. And I think that there's an opportunity there that I wouldn't say it's been missed, but hasn't been emphasized in some areas where we often think of innovation just for our individual needs, but not looking at the ultimate end strategy for how it advances a community in that local area.
I'm going to actually ask Brian specifically. I'm going to disobey my rule where I said we're not targeting specific questions to people, but Brian has successfully built multiple large companies in this place around Pittsburgh. I'm curious if you could talk a little about, given kind of all the headwinds that historically we faced, how have you been successful in doing that?
Yeah, I was going to jump in, but Meredith did such a nice job selling Pittsburgh. I didn't want to get the audience sick, but I'll continue. So first off, we in Pittsburgh in particular, and I do think this can apply to other regions, we solve and work on really hard problems. So when I go West Coast and I hear pitches, I can sort of pattern match and say I've heard that a few times. When I'm here in Pittsburgh and I talk to young entrepreneurs or even seasoned ones, people have big ideas here and they're tackling really, really hard things that don't pay off for many, many, many years. And I think that's the most underrated part, is because we have so many seeds in the ground here, it's going to take potentially a couple of decades for all of that to come up, but it will come up. We work really well together here in Pittsburgh. As a younger person who was raising money in a time when there really wasn't a lot of money to raise a while back, everyone came together and said, how can we help you, Brian? Whether they were large companies, whether it's the CEO of a large bank, or whether it's other entrepreneurs who've been very successful, or even folks that are just wealthy in the area and want to do good things in the region. And I just think building that network and pulling that together and selling your idea is actually easier in some ways in a place like this, because everyone wants to see others be successful. And so I've certainly benefited from that. I know others. It's a huge fallacy that you have to go to the West or East Coast in order to raise money. It's just not the case. If you've got a great idea, you will get it funded, and the capital will go where you are and where you can build a team. And there's no better place to build a team than right here where you have the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon in your back door.
And if I could just jump on that, as you're going through that journey of raising money, there are incredible resources here. There will be difficult points in that journey where you think, have I made the right decision? Should I be here? Should I go over here? Should I be talking to this person? But I think history provides a number of great examples here. If you look at the semiconductor industry, we're talking about AI, right? It moves from California to Texas to Japan to South Korea to Taiwan. None of these things are tied inherently to a single place. You can watch them move around. If you look at the aerospace economy, and who would have thought that it would be based in Starbase, Texas right now? But none of these things are wed to any one location. They go to where that opportunity, where the talent is, where the opportunity is. They go sometimes to where a single person says, hey, this is where I am, this is where I want to be, and this is where I decide that I'm going to plant these seeds, to Brian's point. And so as you're going through that journey, you can absolutely do it here. There will be tough points, but at those tough points, it's good to remember to look at those analogies and say, none of these things are wed inherently to a single place. They can be wherever you decide you have the confidence and the conviction to build it, and where you decide you want them to be.
So if we take that as a jumping off point, if you had your kind of magic wand, what are the structural changes that you think, be they in academia, regional policy, funding mechanisms, to help scale these early stage opportunities, to help scale these early stage companies?
I'll start again. Yeah. As we're talking about data sets, this is what I'm doing now. This is what I'm focusing on, right? There are, Jeff was alluding to this earlier, right? There are things that you can generate de novo, but there's incredible data that already exists, and the hurdle are, there are many institutional hurdles, and often what you need when you talk about getting those data that are locked in a silo somewhere, for example, all of the data from UPMC, often what you need is not to work. You need one person kind of at the top of the totem pole to say, you know what, I see it, I see what you're trying to do, I believe it, and I'm going to start to clear that red tape, right? You're not going to argue your way out of tape from first principles. You are going to cut your way through it by convincing people one at a time that what you are trying to do is ultimately incredibly important, and having people help you clear that path. To Brian's point about there are always people out there to help you, but if you could wave your magic wand, right? What you really need are a few people with the ability to clear those paths for you to say, you know what, I see what you're trying to do, and I'm going to help you work through all of the the committees, the panels, the regulations that are put in place at the institution level, at the city level, at the state level, at the federal level. You need to find those people, because those are the inflection points.
So I think that was a beautiful answer from a founder perspective. I guess from an ecosystem perspective, one of the bits that we've been working on is creating a real density of opportunities for investors, say, to come and look at. So events like this are wonderful. We, last year we would do a pitch event, a standalone pitch event, and we'd get a nice number of fairly high quality investors together. This year we said, let's do a week of it. Let's get a couple hundred opportunities together for them to look at. We quadrupled the number of high quality investors that flew in for the event. So I think working from a regional perspective and in a more cohesive way to create a really high density of interest that creates an excitement level that convinces people to get on a plane from LA, from San Francisco, from Boston, from wherever they're coming, to come to Pittsburgh, because we can say, Pittsburgh's so great, but getting on a flight is not an insignificant thing when you've got a busy week. So we've got to bring the value to the table, and it'll take us working together as a region. So instead of doing 6 events over 6 weeks in the fall, as we did this year as a region, what if we come up with one hell of a week where we put all of our opportunities together and say, everybody, it's worth getting on a plane to Pittsburgh this week.
I'm from Silicon Valley, but I'm here in Pittsburgh because there's a lot of other companies I'm going to visit for potential investments after the conference. So I couldn't agree more with what everyone is saying in terms of the value of Pittsburgh and the startup culture. And what we're finding with seed investments is they're much larger now than they used to be. We typically do a seed investment with a startup without actually even having revenue at $1 million to $3 million at the seed round. So I'm super excited about the companies. Full disclosure, I used to teach at Carnegie Mellon when I was a young professor, but long before I was in Silicon Valley. But there's no doubt that from an autonomy perspective and autonomous vehicles and robotics, and healthcare, this is a capital in the country.
I'll add, and maybe some others on the panel have even stronger experiences and opinions of this, but maybe the flip side of this conversation of how do you scale, I would say as an operator, one of the things I look for and I've seen quite a bit of is just an emphasis on getting back to fundamentals. I think make it easy for people to invest, make sure that you have your fundamentals down, what do I solve for, what is the market I'm targeting, kind of where do I play, how do I win, and that's just sort of the flip side of this discussion is I think making sure that the business is in order. And when the markets were doing well, when there's a very low cost of capital, I think that it was easier to scale. I think now there's a little bit more emphasis on this than there had been in previous years.
I could just chime in on the regulatory stuff, which you mentioned, Evan. I'm in a very heavily regulated industry, being transportation, vehicles, and that sort of thing. I was the first guy from Google as part of their what just became public as a self-driving car initiative in like 2011. It's the first guy to go to NHTSA in Washington, D.C. and explain what we were doing. And they accepted us with open arms, I would say. And I was sort of the safety guy at the time. And I just walked in, and I kept it really basic. I think the propensity is to walk in with a super technical introduction of what you're doing, and I just kept it very basic around, actually one of the automotive safety guys I had spoken to at the time who navigated GM through the airbag crisis in the 90s, if any of you remember that. He said, Brian, we're all epidemiologists. And I said, what are you talking about? I didn't go to school for medicine. He said, no. When there's an accident, we try to sit and understand how did it happen, what were the bad outcomes, and how do we prevent it from ever happening again. He said, you're just at the next evolution of that. And so I walked in with a story arc that basically said, cars were killing people in the 60s, your group was formed, there's been a series of inflection points over the years, but only 3 or 4 at the time. Seatbelts, that made a big deal. Make crash structure that doesn't impale someone if you get in a front-end collision, that was a big deal. Traction control to keep the car on the road, that was a big deal, and we're the next big thing. We kept it very simple and just told the story arc and said, look, the next big thing in safety is not going to be some little control module in a vehicle somewhere. It's going to be removing human error, removing the error of human judgment, and that sort of thing. And we sold the potential on it, and we basically stayed in what I would say regulatory ambiguity up until actually this year, where now there's finally some proposed rulemaking that looks sensible now. And but think about it, we've been developing this product for over 20 plus years now and operating in a lot of ambiguity, but yet the investment still flowed. People were still willing to look at the mission. And my point in all this is to say, if you sell the mission and if you're clear about the vision and the good that it does, what I've learned is that folks will listen to your story, they will work with you, and it may take a lot longer. I certainly didn't think it was going to take from 2011 to now to actually get some movement, but eventually the pieces will fall into place. And so I know things can be slow and amorphous and difficult in the healthcare area as well, and that's probably an understatement, but the pieces will fall into place, and it shouldn't stop you from going after really big ideas.
And you talked a little bit about capital flow earlier, and we're talking about scale now. When we talk about scale, one of the things that you'll often get asked, right, is what's the size of the market? And in the life sciences, we often talk about the market size with respect to different diseases and how much we spend to treat those diseases today, and how much we spend on chronic care. But one of the things that you can do to expand your thought process as to that market is to think about things like, as you're reading about self-driving cars, right? Think about things like the impact of, an accident on health span and lifespan, right? And we tend not to, we define healthcare, we define life sciences very, very narrowly. But as you expand those definitions, a lot more different opportunities and technologies start to fall into that bucket. Things like automated driving, where you say, is this really, this is potentially, could we argue that this is a healthcare innovation, right? Because you are preventing disease, you are preventing death, and then you get to a much more interesting, ultimately addressable market. You get to more interesting thoughts as to, the capital that can be justified. I can justify a much larger expenditure if I'm thinking of the ultimate payoff in that broader way. And so that you start to get into really interesting discussions as to what falls into this bucket? How should we be thinking about this? How can you bring this all together? And all of a sudden, you now have the entirety of the robotics history at Carnegie Mellon that becomes part of that story that hadn't been. And it's just a mindset shift, but that I think it's worth being part of the story. And as you're talking about how much can we afford to invest, how much time should we be investing thinking about this, I think all of these things are part of the story.
So when we talk about investors, we're typically talking about them providing capital to a company, but they often provide a lot more to organizations. So either from you as an investor perspective or you as an operator in a company perspective, what are the top couple of things outside of capital that you have received from your investors?
I mean, for me, certainly beyond just, obviously the capital is really important, Evan, but beyond that, the access to a network and talent, being able to, especially if you're just starting out, a lot of times you're probably a very technical founder. You kind of have an idea of who you need to build on maybe your engineering team, but to actually get to scale and to be able to receive those later stage checks, I mean, you actually need to have people in business development and partnerships and human resources and all the things that you may not know a whole lot about. You got to actually run a company and show that you can actually accept big checks. And so I think you typically, your earlier stage investor can introduce you to a wealth of people who can really have seen scale, who understand business models, and that can help you sort of steer the direction of the company.
Being once a founder 5 times and now on the VC side, I think that the real difference is being founder friendly, scaling the founder faster as opposed to trying to interfere with the business to support it, around its needs beyond just capital. A lot of VCs say that, and they said it to me when I was starting companies, and very few of them follow through on that. I think the VCs that are going to be surviving this AI boom are going to be the ones that really help founders scale and provide a lot of value beyond the capital. I think we've got to become more founder friendly, which is one of the reasons I joined VC, is because I see it as a founder, not as a venture capitalist.
Yeah, ex-founders make the best VCs. Seriously, so there's I will follow on that with a fund. There's a fund called Accomplice in Boston that set up a sub-fund called Spearhead. And Spearhead raised a bunch of capital and then put it behind CEOs in their portfolio and said, great, you invest this. And so the CEOs in their portfolio then talk to the other companies that are like, great, I'm working with this person. I know they're doing amazing stuff. They became those connectors. And then they sometimes join the boards of those companies and are able to give the founder-to-founder advice. Like, I just went ahead of you by like 3 years. Here's what I faced at that point, which I think, to your question, is one of the best things an investor can do for a company, is help the founder with what they don't know that they don't know. Because the founders are very smart, especially with the wealth of resources out there. If they know they don't know it, they're going to go figure it out. It's what they don't know that they don't know about, oh, hey, wait, you should be focusing a lot more on this right now. Let me connect you to somebody who can help educate you on that. And that's it. And supporting the founder at that point with that level of education of how to become a founder and not just the expert that is the reason that the investment happened in the first place.
I'd also say that near death is very inspirational in business. I think that a really good VC that is made up of former founders realizes that the challenge of making payroll can sometimes be overwhelming, and to give them the empathy and support when it is near death so that they can pivot and be successful, because almost every successful business has had that near death, and it's not just startups. Apple had near death too, and look where it is today. So I think having VCs and investors who understand that near death experience is bound to happen, and how to pivot and grow from that near death and burgeon, and necessity is the mother of invention, that's when the real innovation triumphs.
So on the flip side, from a founder's perspective, what are the typical couple of things that usually trip up founders from being successful in growing or scaling their businesses?
So I have the great opportunity to work with a lot of early stage founders who are incredibly gifted. And I think the flip side is, allow people to help you get connected to the funding, mentorship, and talent that you need. Those are, kind of the three buckets that not every founder can house within themselves. Every founder has gaps that they need support building around. In, the life science space, we work a lot with Google Ventures, and they've actually created this program around leadership development around their healthcare founders. That's sort of a boot camp, and with the premise that even if you are a technical founder, if that's how you start out, we can grow you into a business leader. Not every venture capital firm believes this, right? I mean, there are many firms that will say, you come to us because we're going to connect you to the scaling CEO, the growth CEO that's going to take this incredible idea that you've brought and really help you build it in a way that maybe you can't conceive of. And so I think for, one of the pieces of guidance that we can give to founders are really think about the investor that you're working with and what's their philosophy on this. And understand where your strengths are and how you want to grow and how you believe you can grow before you sign up.
You just hit on a point that I was not sure where it fit, but it definitely fits in this section, is I would lean on coachability. And I know that there are some exceptions out there, but in my experience, the best founders are coachable. And I think that's something that has been a challenge in some startups that I've worked with and been in, is just that ability to say, hey, is there another view? What don't I know? And to look for advice on that. It doesn't mean following it blindly, but it's definitely something that I think I'm more attuned to now as I look at startups.
Yeah, the concept is real. I do want to take a little issue with the term coachability, which I've stopped using when I talk about that concept. I'm sorry, but because it implies that we know what we're doing and we're going to coach you in how to do it, right? And it's really a lot more about how does the founder keep the mission in mind, but is very open and incorporates not just from their board or VC, but from the market or from other places. How do I incorporate that so that I can tack and weave and go exactly the right place to make the next round happen, to make the product successful, to make it commercial, et cetera? But it's that concept of being able to absorb feedback.
Exactly, and I'll use the Ted Lasso example. I think that's a great example these days. A coach who doesn't know soccer, in his case, can still be a great coach. I think it's a mindset in how do we shape that team, and that's maybe how I view it slightly differently, but I agree.
I would just add one more thing, which is a word that we don't use enough, empathy. I think, one of the things I learned in product design at Apple before I was doing startups is to really develop a great product, you have to empathize with the user before they even know what they want. And empathy is equally important with founders and venture capitalists, is to understand what they're going through and how they're going through it and collaborate. Collaboration is another word that I think is often misunderstood in the venture capital space, because collaboration sometimes can just mean a board meeting when really it should be an active and ongoing relationship that's a dialogue that is unceasing. But empathy is also really important to identify with founders and to be able to be in their shoes.
So I'm going to actually start by asking Meredith a question.
Ooh.
So when you talked earlier about galvanizing the region,
Yeah.
so the region has been, I'll say, successful in the early stage generation of intellectual property and ideas in AI and robotics and healthcare. But that galvanizing thing hasn't happened for decades. So maybe all of us are familiar with the kind of Pittsburgh and the Pittsburgh story. Do you have some thoughts of why that hasn't organically happened, and a couple of thoughts on what could be done differently?
Oh boy, Evan, do I have thoughts on this? Yeah, where to begin? So, I think Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon actually are quite similar in a number of ways, and unsurprisingly. We were founded by an entrepreneur and a venture capitalist. We are very hardworking and humble people. We do not brag. We do not boast. We certainly do not market. And I remember Pittsburgh Technology Council hosted during the pandemic, a series of talks, and one of them was the mayor of Miami. And this was when he was trying to make Miami the crypto capital of the U.S. And at the beginning, the moderator was telling him about the story of Pittsburgh and how remarkable the city is. And he said, "Story of Pittsburgh? I don't know the story of Pittsburgh. You guys don't have a story." And I simultaneously thought, what an asshole. And also, he's right. He's right. We do a great job of talking to ourselves about what we're doing quietly, demurely. We certainly do not have a single-minded message that we take out into the world, and we are not working towards this future collectively, I would argue, where we're really focused on building these high-risk, early-stage companies that will be the economy of the future. I think, you could look to, now I'm really just slapping people around. But, we unveiled this Walk of Fame yesterday, which is awesome. I love that idea. We had Jonas Salk and Andrew Carnegie on it. Great. Of course they should be on Pittsburgh's Walk of Fame. They're also dead. Could we put an entrepreneur or an innovator on there who's actually alive, who can come to the Walk of Fame and walk on the Walk of Fame?
Hear, hear.
I think I should pass the mic.
Okay. Next.
I take issue with how you set up the question. I think Pittsburgh's on fire, and we've got more successes and wins happening than ever before. I get tired of hearing, of getting down on ourselves. I agree we don't tell our story as well as we should, but on the other hand, we're too damn busy in the field getting shit done.
All right, so we are getting ready to wind down. I think we've been up here long enough, and I want to make sure Meredith
But
has
it just
an
got good.
So maybe for the audience, we'll just go down the row. Any kind of final thoughts as we think about the future of AI on the investment side that you want to make sure that folks know about before they take off?
I just want to see more startups, and I keep coming back to friction. And for anybody who has a thought about what they'd like to do it, and the AI will help you do it. The number of companies I know, and I say this as an investor, not having as many things to invest in, that just had an idea, started it up, sold it to somebody without any investor for 7 or sometimes 8 figures. I have never heard the number of startups that are doing that as I have today, because they were able to get all the coaching, all the coding, all the stuff done to help them. So it is also, it's not just something to invest in, it is a tool for the founders to take what they've done to the next level.
Yeah, to build on what Kevin's saying, a lot of people compare the AI marketplace to the app ecosystem many years ago, and I don't think it's a fair comparison, because I think, as Kevin said, with AI, so much of it can be done for you that if you have a really great idea, the coding, the other elements of the business to get to an MVP are far easier than they've ever been before. And I fully invite everyone to recognize that we believe in Pittsburgh, because the 3 of us are here from outside Pittsburgh to be here because we believe it's an ecosystem that's a model for the world.
I think this is a very exciting time and could really be, could be a true golden age in health, particularly around AI and tech. I think it's going to require a combination of investment in both the underlying infrastructure as well as the individual startups. The thinking for me is it's a question of sort of how do we get to yes? How do we break down some of the regulatory barriers? How do we not look at these as obstacles, but say we're going to overcome those obstacles, or maybe put those on the shelf as we work through them to continue the innovation, not let it stifle that creative process and that innovation process.
I'd say everybody here has somebody that you suspect has a really interesting idea, right? Or you know that has an interesting idea, and hasn't quite taken the leap. Like you can walk out of this room today and text that person and say, you know what, I think you should go do whatever you're talking about doing, right? There is, today, there are analogs today of what self-driving tech was 20 years ago, where it seems unachievable, it seems onerous from a technical perspective, from a regulatory perspective, from a capital perspective. Every single person here can walk out and make a phone call or send a text and say, hey, I think you should go do that. Or alternatively, you have an asset, right? An asset that could be monetized, a path you could clear, and maybe you don't know who's going to go take advantage of that, right? But you could say, I have, I head up this department at a hospital or at a university, or I have access to this natural resource, and you can put it out there that somebody can do something with this. Somebody can create something of value. I have access to it. Come and find me. So reach out to that person, right? Or put out that asset that you have, that idea that you have, put that out there into the world and wait for somebody to come find you. You could sit here and say, these are lovely people who have said some interesting things today, which, we are lovely and we have said many interesting and insightful things, mostly Meredith. But that is something everybody here can do something about that today.
Well, on that note, I'd like to thank the panelists for being here today, and thank you all for your attention.
Thank you.